Lightning cracked through the night, carving Hayes Manor into blinding fragments of silver and shadow. Eleanor Hayes stopped midway on the staircase, the thunder sounding like a memory striking bone. The smell of wet earth bled through open windows. Curtains snapped like frightened wings. Thomas Hayes Sr. muttered. "It's the house again." Martha Hayes whispered a prayer she had repeated her entire life. Samuel Reed clutched the banister, his small hands trembling. Portraits rattled on their hooks, faces half alive in each flash. Eleanor felt the tremor rise through the floorboards into her chest. She heard it then, a woman's cry from the attic, one syllable that carried her own name. She whispered, "Clara?" The wind answered with a long breath, and the flame beside her guttered out, leaving the hall in a darkness that waited to speak. Morning crept through fog, turning the storm into breath. Eleanor Hayes sat on the manor's front step, hair damp, staring at footprints in the mud that ended where no path began. Thomas Hayes, Sr. poured water into a kettle that hissed like the house remembering. "They always come after thunder," he said. Martha Hayes stirred from her chair, whispering, "The ground forgets nothing." Samuel Reed pressed his face to the window, eyes searching for movement. The air was heavy but expectant. When the kettle screamed, everyone flinched. Eleanor rose, whispering, "Something woke up last night." Outside, the wind stilled, as if listening for what she would say next. The fog thickened as Eleanor crossed the courtyard, her boots sinking into soil softened by rain. She felt drawn toward the family cemetery, where the smell of lilac clung stubbornly despite the cold. Names carved in marble seemed to breathe under mist. One stone leaned forward as though listening, Clara Hayes. Eleanor brushed moss away. Beneath her fingertips, letters pulsed faint warmth. Thomas's voice drifted faintly behind her. "Don't wake what has work to finish," she whispered. Then it was never buried. The wind circled her once, gentle yet insistent, and a low hum answered from the ground. Fear and belonging tangled in her chest. Inside, the manor's air felt different, lighter yet charged. Eleanor placed her palm on the dining room wall. It vibrated faintly, as if echoing her pulse. Thomas slammed his cane once. "You shouldn't have gone there," she faced him. "It's my family too." Martha Hayes clutched her rosary, whispering. She opened the door none of us could close. Samuel crept toward the piano where a single key pressed itself down, releasing one pure note. Everyone froze. The sound lingered, sweet and wrong. Eleanor said, "If truth knocks, I won't bar the door." Lightning flickered again, though no storm remained, casting the note into silence. Night returned without thunder. Candles burned low, leaving the hall breathing shadows. Eleanor woke to soft humming, the same tune she'd heard at the grave. She followed it barefoot across cold marble floor. Portraits watched, cracked eyes gleaming faint firelight. The sound drew her to the attic door. It stood ajar now. Inside hung Clara's mirror, veiled in dust. She wiped the glass and saw Clara Hayes behind her, smiling faintly. "You kept my name," the reflection whispered. Eleanor reached out but felt only air. The mirror fogged over, forming one word, remember. The house sighed, satisfied. As the candle died, rain struck the cracked glass of Hayes Manor like impatient fingers. Eleanor Hayes pressed her palm to the window, whispering, "Something's here, Thomas." Thunder rolled, swallowing her voice. "Thomas Hayes Sr." muttered. It was over long ago, but the creak in the hallway said otherwise. A photograph had vanished from its frame. Cold air brushed Eleanor's neck, carrying the scent of old smoke. She turned. The corridor was empty. Martha Hayes' cane tapped in warning from the stairwell, the rhythm uneven, like a heartbeat under strain. Eleanor's pulse followed it, faster, frightened but curious. Samuel Reed called from the doorway. "Mrs. Hayes, should I fetch the lantern?" The storm answered first, throwing light across the missing picture's shadow. Beneath it, words scratched into plaster. "We are not gone," Eleanor whispered. "Then I'll find you." Outside, lightning split the horizon, a wound reopening itself. Silence arrived like mercy after thunder. The Manor's generator hummed weakly, light trembling across Eleanor's face. Martha Hayes sat beside the cold hearth, whispering prayers between breaths. "You shouldn't chase ghosts," she said. Eleanor replied softly. "They're already chasing us." Thomas Hayes Sr. poured tea with hands that trembled despite his denial. Steam rose, curling like memory. Samuel Reed sketched the missing photo's outline in his notebook. The page tore slightly, revealing an older page beneath. Another sketch, older handwriting. Same faces. Outside, the storm softened, the world holding its breath. Eleanor felt the calm not as peace but as waiting. "Mother," she said, voice steady now, "when did we stop telling the truth?" The teacup cracked under Thomas's grip. Martha closed her eyes. In that quiet break, Eleanor sensed a door opening. Not in wood, but in time itself. The silence shattered when the old radio hissed to life. A forgotten broadcast whispered names too familiar. Eleanor froze. Thomas Hayes Sr. reached to unplug it, but the cord was already severed. His voice rose, "It's nonsense." Yet fear dulled the edges of his anger. The static grew into a voice. Clara Hayes, long dead, singing half a lullaby. Martha Hayes covered her ears. Samuel Reed stared, whispering, "She's in the wires." The bulbs flickered in time with the melody, shadows bending toward the sound. Eleanor's eyes filled, not with tears but reflection. She could see her own face layered with Clara's. The radio clicked off on its own, leaving an echo that clung to the walls. Eleanor whispered, "What did you do to her?" Thomas didn't answer. His silence was heavier than the storm had been. At dawn, Eleanor followed the faint humming into the attic where Martha kept old trunks sealed by rope. Dust rose like ghosts, disturbed. "You'll regret this," Martha warned from below. "Truth doesn't heal, it feeds." Eleanor lifted the lid, photographs spilled like ash. Among them, a letter addressed to Thomas, written by Clara Hayes. The ink bled, but the words still burned. "You promised silence would keep us safe." Thomas appeared in the doorway, eyes tired. "It was her choice," he said, though no conviction followed. Martha's voice softened. "Every promise costs the next generation." Eleanor stared at the letter, trembling in her hand, the handwriting looping like a curse. Outside, the wind carried a woman's hum, Clara's song returning with the sunrise. The day turned colder, though the sun climbed high. Eleanor packed the letter inside her coat. "No more silence," she said. Thomas Hayes Sr. looked past her toward the family graves. "You think truth frees you?" he asked. She stepped closer, defiant. "It frees her." Martha Hayes placed a trembling hand on Eleanor's arm. "Child, you carry what she couldn't bury." The wind rose, scattering dry leaves down the hall like fleeing spirits. Samuel Reed ran in, breathless. The name on the grave changed. They rushed outside. The stone once reading Clara Hayes now bore Eleanor Hayes. Fear cut through determination. But Eleanor did not step back. "Then I'll change it again," she said quietly, and began walking toward the graveyard gate, toward Act 3. Morning light finally pierced the storm. Eleanor Hayes sat by the cracked window, believing peace had returned. Thomas Hayes Sr. brewed coffee, voice calm. "It's over, Eleanor." The smell of burnt beans thickened the air. Martha Hayes hummed a church tune, her hands shaking only once. A knock came. Samuel Reed opened the door to a stranger. Inspector David Cole, polite smile, coat dripping. He spoke of old police records, of Clara Hayes' sealed file. The calm fractured. Thomas's spoon slipped, striking porcelain like a gunshot. Eleanor smiled too quickly. At last, she said, someone ready to help. Yet behind Cole's steady eyes lived something unreadable. The fire hissed, whispering secrets no one wished to hear. The inspector's notebook opened with a soft sigh. Eleanor leaned closer, drawn to the faded photograph inside, Clara Hayes smiling beside Thomas decades ago. Thomas exhaled slowly. She was sick, he said. You told me she drowned, Eleanor answered. Martha's whisper fell like dust. Sometimes drowning is kinder. Cole's pen hovered, collecting truths. The room seemed to shrink around their words. Eleanor's hand brushed his sleeve, gratitude laced with need. Thank you for listening, she murmured. He nodded, eyes kind, too kind. Outside, wind stirred ash from the chimney, tracing lines against the pane. Something in Thomas's stare warned of danger unseen. The scene ended on a breath that felt borrowed from the dead. Evening returned with icy stillness. Cole and Eleanor walked the hall lined with portraits. He said softly, "Every family hides one unmarked grave," she replied. "We've hidden several," he smiled, not kindly. They stopped before Clara's portrait, paint flaked, eyes alive. "Truth is dangerous when it belongs to the living," he murmured. Eleanor studied him, realizing his questions were too specific, his knowledge older than police records. "Who sent you?" she asked. Silence answered. His reflection in the glass moved a heartbeat late. Martha's cane tapped below, echoing like a warning drum. Cole whispered, "Sometimes justice needs a witness. Sometimes a sacrifice." The air froze, belief trembling into doubt. The betrayal unfolded without sound. Thomas Hayes Sr. entered clutching a folder marked Coroner's Report. Clara Hayes. He placed it before Eleanor. "You wanted truth. Read it." Pages fluttered, revealing his signature under cause of death, suffocation, assisted. Her breath caught. The room tilted. "You killed her," she said. "She begged me to," Thomas whispered, tears sharp as glass. Cole stepped forward, voice firm. "He's lying." The moment split two truths, both poisonous. Eleanor's knees weakened. Samuel Reed's drawing fell, showing the same scene decades old. The lamp shattered, plunging all into flickering dark. Martha cried out, "Not again!" Thunder replaced words. Eleanor touched the folder. The ink smeared like blood. Silence reigned after Thunder's retreat. Smoke curled from the broken lamp, smelling of old oil and sorrow. Eleanor sat on the floor, folder open across her lap. "It was mercy," Thomas whispered again, voice empty. She looked up slowly. "Mercy doesn't hide graves." Cole disappeared into the dark corridor. No footsteps followed. Martha whispered prayers that sounded like apologies. Samuel pressed his small hand against Eleanor's shoulder, steady and warm. The wind outside had died, yet curtains moved as if breathing. Eleanor folded the letter inside her coat, rising with new calm. "The dead aren't finished," she said. She walked toward the cellar door where faint humming rose, Clara's song calling her name. The storm had passed, leaving the house hollow with its own heartbeat. Eleanor Hayes moved through corridors, still damp with night, hearing each floorboard sigh like memory. Thomas Hayes Sr. sat beside the cold hearth, face carved from ash. Martha Hayes whispered psalms that no longer carried comfort. The folder lay open, words blurred by tears and candle smoke. Samuel Reed slept near the stairs, clutching his sketchbook. Eleanor traced Clara's name across the paper, murmuring, "Why did you choose silence?" The house breathed back an answer in wind and settling dust. Truth waited beneath stillness, patient, certain, Somewhere deep below, the cellar door shifted, releasing a scent of earth and lilies. Clara's grave scent, calling her downward. The air thickened with memory as Eleanor descended the cellar stairs. Her candle sputtered, painting the walls with trembling gold. Each step echoed both now and then. She saw Clara Hayes' face forming in the dust, a reflection of her own. Whispers overlapped. Thomas's younger voice, Clara's plea, Martha's warning. The truth replayed. A night long ago when Clara had sealed the curse by choice, forcing Thomas to sign the false report. "Better my silence than their ruin," Clara said through memory's veil. Eleanor staggered, candle shaking. "Then we've carried guilt for mercy," she breathed. The cellar pulsed with warmth and sorrow, the line between past and present melting into revelation. Eleanor reached the bottom where an old mirror leaned against the wall. It reflected not her face but Clara's, alive and sorrowful. She whispered, "You were never murdered." Clara's image answered, lips moving without sound until the words formed in her mind. Someone had to bear the wound. A heartbeat thudded louder than the storm ever had. Thomas appeared at the top of the stairs, trembling. "Your mother saved us all," he said. Eleanor turned, tears gleaming. "By burying truth," he nodded once, defeated. The mirror brightened, showing 3 generations bound by choice and shame. Eleanor's breath slowed as understanding replaced fury. She had inherited duty, not curse. Thomas descended slowly, his voice fragile but proud. "I made myself the villain so the family could live free," he said. Martha appeared behind him, eyes wet. "You chose silence over faith," she whispered. He replied, "Faith needed a monster." Eleanor listened, her anger dissolving into ache. The cellar's light wavered, splitting their faces between shadow and fire. Clara's reflection smiled faintly. The realization burned through Eleanor. There was no single betrayer. They were all part of the wound. Truth wasn't pure. It was shared, endless. Outside, rain began again. Softer now, washing the soil above the grave. Balance returned, cruel and tender at once. Morning broke fully, pale and forgiving. Eleanor stepped outside into the graveyard. The folder pressed to her chest. Thomas and Martha stood at the doorway, older than ever. Samuel Reed watched silently, understanding without words. Eleanor knelt at Clara's grave, the inscription glowing faintly with dew. "So, this was the truth all along," she said, voice steady. "It was never about the curse. It was about carrying love through pain." Wind lifted her hair as sunlight touched the stones for the first time in years. The air no longer trembled with voices, only the living remained, changed. The wound still existed, but now it breathed. Eleanor rose, ready for what waited beyond the gate. Night thickened again. Air pulsed with waiting thunder. Eleanor Hayes felt each heartbeat like a drum behind her ribs. From the cellar came Clara's humming. Soft then sharp. Thomas Hayes, Sr. whispered, "Don't open that door!" But the latch had already trembled under unseen hands. Martha Hayes gripped her rosary until beads snapped. Samuel Reed held the lantern high, flame shaking. The sound of wind vanished, replaced by breathing that wasn't theirs. Eleanor said quietly, "This ends now." She stepped forward, light catching her face, eyes steady, though tears burned. The door groaned open halfway, revealing darkness that seemed alive. Lightning flashed. The world held its breath. The door burst wide, wind roaring upward. Candles died. Shadows twisted into human shapes, echoes of the Hayes bloodline. Clara Hayes stepped from the dark, neither ghost nor flesh, eyes calm with grief. "You broke the seal," she said. Eleanor's voice rose over the storm. Truth should never be sealed, Thomas shouted. She died to save you. Lightning cracked, revealing them in opposing halves of light. Martha cried out, "End it before it feeds again." The air shook. Samuel screamed as the lantern shattered. For 1 second all was white, then black. The confrontation had begun. Amid chaos, the lantern's flame rekindled, small and trembling. Martha Hayes stumbled toward Clara's figure, voice breaking. "If someone must go, let it be me." Eleanor reached to stop her. Too late. The wind lifted, swallowing Martha's words. Light enveloped her, gentle, not cruel. When it faded, only her rosary remained on the floor. Thomas fell to his knees, whispering. She freed them. Silence pressed heavy, carrying both grief and peace. Eleanor touched the beads. They were warm. "Then I must finish it," she said. Thunder rolled distant, less violent now, as though the storm itself mourned her passing. Only Eleanor and Thomas remained facing Clara's fading form. "End it," Clara pleaded, "before it begins again." Eleanor turned to her father. "You lied to protect, but truth is what saves." He lifted his trembling hands. "I can't lose you too." Rain hammered roof above. Cellar lights flickered like heartbeat. Eleanor stepped into the spectral glow, her palm touching Clara's chest. "Let the wound rest," she whispered. The walls groaned. Portraits upstairs shattered in echo. Wind spiraled through every hallway, carrying centuries of cries. When it stopped, only one voice lingered, Eleanor's, steady and new. Dawn crept through the broken windows, soft and weightless. The manor smelled of rain and burned oil. Eleanor stood amid silence that felt alive. Thomas Hayes, senior, sat against the wall, eyes closed but breathing. Samuel Reed wrote quietly in his sketchbook, tracing the last light. Clara's song drifted once more, gentler now, fading into morning birds. Eleanor looked toward the open door. "The wound sleeps," she said. She stepped outside. Dew glistened on graves washed clean. The sky had color again. For the first time in generations, Hayes Manor exhaled. The legacy endured, but its chains had loosened. Smoke curled from the ruins of the lantern. Rain had stopped, leaving the house wrapped in quiet breath. Eleanor Hayes walked through the hall where every portrait had fallen. Glass cracked under her shoes. Thomas Hayes, senior, sat by the hearth, gray ash on his hands, eyes open to nothing. "It's done," he said, the words almost prayer. She looked around and saw absence, of fear, of voices, of her grandmother. The silence pressed but did not hurt. Samuel Reed's small footprints marked the damp floor. Outside, birds called cautiously, as if testing peace. Eleanor closed her eyes, realizing what was gone could never return. The wound had been traded for stillness. Afternoon light reached the manor like forgiveness. Eleanor sat at the writing desk, pages of Clara Hayes' letter before her. She read each line aloud, her voice trembling but clear. "To keep the pain is to keep the family," the ink said, she whispered. "We have kept it long enough." Outside, the wind moved softly through grass, brushing stones clean. Thomas coughed from the doorway, eyes red. "You sound like her," she answered. "No, I sound like me now." In her mind, flashes of Martha's final smile flickered, the calm before the light took her. Eleanor folded the letter neatly, realizing grief had edges that could cut or carve, and hers was becoming shape, not wound. Evening settled softly. Eleanor heard the faint lullaby again, but it no longer frightened her. She followed it to the garden, where mist shimmered between gravestones. Clara Hayes appeared faintly among the lilies, eyes gentle. "You freed us," the echo said. Eleanor whispered, "You freed me." The moment stretched. time folding in quiet gratitude. Samuel approached slowly, lantern small against dusk. "She is smiling," he murmured. Eleanor nodded, tears warm, not heavy. The figure faded into moonlight, leaving only the scent of lilies and peace. The song ended on a single note that blended with the wind, promising remembrance instead of haunting. Inside the quiet house, Eleanor placed Martha Hayes' rosary on the mantel. Thomas watched from his chair, eyes softening with memory. "She always believed silence was strength," he said. Eleanor answered, "She was right, but now strength is truth." He smiled faintly. The first in years. The fire crackled, small but steady. Around them hung portraits restored to their hooks, cracked glass replaced. The manor no longer sighed, it breathed. Eleanor thought of every hand that had carried pain to this moment. In that silence, their lessons became one. Love survives the breaking. A single tear traced down Thomas's cheek, disappearing into ash. At dawn, Eleanor opened the manor's front doors wide. Fresh air swept through rooms once sealed by fear. Samuel Reed ran past her into the yard, laughing. Thomas Hayes Sr. followed slowly, leaning on his cane. Eleanor stepped onto the porch and looked toward the graves, shining with dew. "It's over," she whispered, though it felt more like beginning. The sky stretched clear, a new blue washing away the gray. She turned back toward the open halls and added softly, "May we live lighter than those before us." Wind rustled curtains, carrying her words into the house like a blessing. Morning held its breath. Hayes Manor no longer moaned. Its timbers merely remembered. Eleanor Hayes stood before the window where the first storm had begun. The world outside was washed clean, dew clinging like forgiveness. Thomas Hayes Sr. stirred behind her, whispering, "We are still here." She nodded, hearing every name that had once been whispered in fear, now resting quiet. Smoke from the hearth curled upward like prayer. She touched the glass, tracing Clara's reflection fading in sunlight. The silence asked its own question. Was the peace worth the cost? Eleanor stepped through tall doors carrying a small wooden box of ashes and letters. The path to the graveyard shimmered with morning haze. Each step sounded lighter than memory. Samuel Reed followed, quiet, holding a folded sketch. "Are we leaving it all?" he asked. "We're giving it back," she said. She placed the box beside Clara Hayes' stone, opened it, and let the wind scatter its contents. Paper drifted upward, turning sunlight into silver flakes. Her hands trembled, not from grief but release. The echo of centuries lifted into the sky. Inside the manor later, Eleanor found an old phonograph humming faintly. The needle rested on a cracked record labeled Clara's Voice, 1934. She wound it once. A woman's voice rose, fragile but warm. "To remember is to forgive." Thomas Hayes Sr. closed his eyes, tears sliding through wrinkles like rain on stone. The melody wrapped every room, blending ghosts with air. Eleanor smiled through trembling lips. The line repeated, softer each time, until it became part of the house itself, a truth bound not by curse but by echo. Weeks passed. Grass grew over disturbed earth, and the village road reopened. Children's laughter drifted through open windows where silence once lived. Eleanor tended lilies by the fence, while Samuel painted the manor anew. Thomas watched from his chair, cane resting quietly. The rhythm of life returned, slower, wiser. When neighbors passed, they nodded with respect, as if sensing the peace inside. Eleanor looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you." The wind answered with gentle movement of curtains, carrying her gratitude across generations. At twilight, Eleanor lit one final candle inside the hall. She placed it on the windowsill where the first storm's lightning had struck. Its flame reflected endlessly in the glass. One light multiplied. She whispered, "Truth doesn't end. It breathes." Outside, the horizon deepened to violet, stars flickering awake. The candle burned steady, unafraid of wind. Somewhere beyond, Clara's lullaby echoed once, then faded completely. Eleanor closed the door gently and walked into the quiet night. The house stood luminous behind her, alive yet calm, its wound at last at peace.